In this video, I'm going to show you how to create this typewriter effect in JavaScript. So as I press any key on the keyboard, the event listener picks them up and it passes them back into the document to display by the browser. So let's just jump straight into this. I've got my folder structure here with all three files set up next to each other, and they're all blank at the moment to begin with. So I'm going to hide that panel just so I've got a little bit more space, and I'm going to start with the HTML. I'm using Sublime text editor here, so I can actually just type HTML, hit tab, and then it pre-populates this basic structure for me. So I've got my HTML tags, the head section, and then the empty body tags. The first thing to do here is just to set a title for this. So I'm going to call this Typewriter, and when I save and refresh this, you'll see it comes up at the top there. And next thing I want to do is link the style sheet and the script into my HTML document. Until I do this, they're not going to be any use within here. So I'm going to go into the head area or the head tags, and just above my title tags, I will say link, and if I hit tab, it will autocomplete for me. So link rel style sheet, and the reference to it is style.css. So this allows me to link this style sheet into my HTML document. Now I just need to link the script. I'm going to do that within the body. So right at the bottom of the body tag, I'm going to type script, and again hit tab just to pre-populate it for me. And at the end, I'll say source src is equal to script.js. So you won't have noticed any real difference here, but now those two documents are linked through. Now the only thing left to add onto the HTML document is the actual text that's going to be displayed. So although that text is going to be controlled within JavaScript, I need a tag here that I can actually access. So that tag is going to be a header tag. I will create a h1 tag here, and I will give it a class of text. Now for the time being, just so I can actually display something on the screen, I will put some text in it. I'll just say hello and close out the tag. Now as I save it, there you go, it comes up on the screen here. And for now, actually, that's everything with the HTML. That's pretty much done. I can move on to do some basic styling within the style sheet now. Now to begin with pretty much all CSS documents, I like to reset some of the initial default parameters. So for example, you can see that there's space above and to the left of this hello text. And that's because it has margin by default, which I want to get rid of. So I'm going to say margin is 0. Now this is going to be applying to all of the elements and classes along this page. So when I set margin to 0, you notice it just pops up into the top left. So it's overridden the default margin and set it to 0. I'll do the same with padding, and then lastly, my box sizing I will set to border box. Now I can move on to the body styling. So for the body, first of all, I want to change the background color. And the color that I'd used in the demo is kind of like a light blue. The code was A1FAFD. You can mess around with this and choose a different color if you prefer. Now let's also change the font. So I'll go font family, and I like to use Helvetica. So we use Helvetica here, and if you look at the hello text, when I save, there you go, it's automatically changed over to the Helvetica text. The other thing I need to do is give this body a height. So we'll say, well actually I'll demonstrate what it looks like without it. So if I inspect and I go into the body, you can see it's showing you, it's highlighting the height of it as 37 pixels. And that's just because that's how much space the contents of it are taking up. So the contents of it at the moment are just the hello tag, the hello text within the h1 tag. I want this body to take up the entirety of the page. And to do that, I just set it to 100 VH. So this means that no matter what size of window or display you've got, it is always going to set it to 100% of it, i.e. The entire height based on the size of the viewport. If I inspect this again, did I save this? I hadn't saved it. Okay, there we go. So now the body, you can see, is spanning the entire available vertical height. And this is going to be important when I come to adjust my positioning of this text, which is what I'm going to do now. So I could play around with this by setting my margins to auto and so on, but that's not going to help me with the vertical positioning. Instead, what I will do is set my display to flex, which will give me the functionality that comes with Flexbox. So although nothing is changed immediately, what I can now say is justify content, center. So that justifies it left to right. And then I can do the same thing by typing align items, center, and it justifies it or aligns it vertically, up and down. Now if I get rid of this height and I save it, you notice that goes away. It puts it back up to the top. And that's because there is nothing really, or there is no room for it to be able to align it within the body, because the body is really just as big as the text itself. So it is already aligned. But if I say that the body needs to be as big as the screen, well, there you go. Now it's going to align it perfectly in the middle of that screen. So that's it. That's the body styled. Now I can work on that h1 tag. Now I could target, remember this has a class as well, so I could just target the class, but in this case it's a very simple structure. I don't actually have anything else other than this h1 tag anyway. So I can target either. I'm going to go with the h1 tag. I'm going to increase the size of the font to 6 rem. So there we go, that's a lot bigger, but it's a little bit too bold for my liking. So let's say font weight, and I'll go with lighter. There we go. And I also want to just space out the letters a little bit. I'll say letter spacing is 0.25 rem. Okay, that just shifts them apart a little bit. And lastly, what I want to do is add that little vertical blinking line on the right hand side, which kind of just gives it that typewriter effect as if it's waiting for more input. There's a few different ways of doing this, but I'm just going to do it with the border. Now, at the moment, this h1 tag, it's got a certain amount of space, but it has no border visible. What I can do is say border 5 pixels solid, and I'll go with black color. And there you go. So now it's showing a full border all around, and actually it looks kind of cool like that. But I just want this line on the right hand side. So I don't need all the other borders. I just need the right hand border. So we'll say border right. And there we go. It's almost there, but it's not blinking at the moment. It's just a solid line. So to be able to add this blinking effect, I need to add in a little animation here. So to add an animation, we say at keyframes, and then I need to give the animation a name. So I'm going to call this blinking, because that's what's happening. It's going to be a blinking animation for this vertical line. Now I'll come back and add in the actual code within it, but how do I assign this first of all? How do I make it visible, or how do I make it applicable only to the h1 element rather than everything else, for example? Well, I target my h1 element and I say animation blinking. That is the name of the animation, so I want to apply that to this h1 element. How long do I want it to last, or how long do I want it to take? 800 milliseconds. We can play around with that number to see how it looks. And lastly, how many times do I want it to repeat? Well, I want it to be constant, so I want it to keep blinking. That means that I need this to be set to infinite. So now that I've got this defined, I can actually go into this keyframe section and start adding in the different points at which I want the animation to change. And I'm going to define them based on percentages. So 800 milliseconds is going to be the duration. So I can just simply set percentages along this duration. So say if I set 0%, it's right at the beginning. And if I go with 50%, it's going to be halfway through. And I can define how I want this line to be displayed at those different points. Well, to begin with, I want it to be displayed as a solid line exactly as it is. So no real difference there. The border color is going to be black as it currently is. Well, then let's say at 50% through the animation, I want to change that border color. So I'm going to set it to red. And if I save it again, and there you go, straight away, you can see that it's now blinking between this black and red color. So that's fine, but that's not really the effect I wanted. What I actually want is for that to completely disappear. So rather than having a specific color, I want that to be transparent. If I save this again, now you can see all that's happening is it's starting off black, and then it gets, well, let's increase this duration so it happens slower. You can see that it goes from black to kind of slowly transparent until it's completely invisible. And that's really all that's happening here. Now I put this in a separate little area on its own just to demonstrate, but actually I already have my h1 being targeted here. So I can put this code within this bit. So all of it is just contained within the same area where I'm styling the h1 tag. Save that again just to make sure. There we go. It's still all working correctly. So I'm nearly done with the CSS. There's a couple of little things I want to do. I've not defined a color here for the font. Now that's because by default it's already black, but really it would be good practice to define it anyway, because if I want to change the background to something and I decide to change the text color, well, it's good to have it defined there so I know what it starts with. Now the other thing here, before I move on to the JavaScript, is this is fine as a word on its own, but if I go back into the HTML and let's just say I'm going to add in a bunch of spaces here. So you would expect to see this exact thing displayed here. If I save this, notice that didn't happen. All it's added is one space. Let's add a bunch more between the L and the O, save it again. It's the exact same thing. It's only added one space. So it doesn't matter how many spaces I add in here. The HTML document in the browser, it ignores them all. It just takes one space. So it kind of automatically works out how much spacing it should allow. And in this case, it's just going to say, well, you don't need all of that. I'm just going to put one space in between. Now that's not really going to be much use for this typewriter. So what I need to do is go into my style sheet and within the H1 tag, add an additional parameter here. So just underneath where I've set my, say, my letter spacing, I want to tell it how to work with the white space. So those tabs, or sorry, those spaces that I was adding, that's defined as white space. And I want to add in white space pre. So if I save this, I go back here and do the same again. Now you notice it's actually adding the spaces in. So we've now told, or we've overridden that default value of the CSS and HTML to ignore those additional white spaces. We want to make sure that they're all kept and the text is displayed exactly as it is within the HTML. So that's it. That's everything set up for the HTML and the CSS. Now I can finally move on to the script. Because at the moment, this is just the default text that I put in. If I type anything, if I press anything on my keyboard, nothing happens because we're not really processing it yet. So to start off with, I need to be able to access this text within my JavaScript. So I'm going to add some comments as I go to explain what's happening. First of all, I'm going to have an area for query selectors. Now I only actually need one query selector and it's going to be that text. So I'm going to say const for constant text input. So this is just a variable name that I make up. And then document.query selector. Just make sure I type that correctly. And now I need to be able to define which selector I want to query. So which element of this HTML document do I want to pass into the JavaScript? Well, it's actually this text here. And specifically, it's the class of text. So I need to make sure, remember, when you're accessing classes, it begins with a full stop. It's the same within your CSS, full stop for classes and a £sign for IDs. I'm going to say full stop text. And now I can just test whether this is actually working. Let's say console.log text input, which is that variable name, dot text content. So if I save this and I display my console here, it's displaying the text. So it's displaying what I initially had within this H1 element. So I know that this is now working and it's pulling that through. So that's fine. Now I want to add on my event listener. So let's just get rid of this console log for now. And I'll add a comment instead to say event listener. Now the event listener is going to be applicable not just to a particular element on the page, but to the entire document. So it doesn't matter where I've clicked on the page, I just want it to always record whatever key I press. So that means that I'm going to add this event listener to my document. The same way as I've pulled this query selector using document dot, I'll do the same thing here. I'll say document dot add event listener. And there's a whole bunch of different events that you could listen for, but I'm looking for key presses. So the event for that I'm going to use is key down. And when I get a key down event, I want to create a function which takes E, which is the event, and passes it into a function for me. So just to make sure that this is working, what I can do is say console.log E. So now it's going to console log that event whenever I press a key. So if I press A, you see I'm given this event here, and I can expand this out, and it's got a bunch of properties here. Now, the important ones I'm going to look for are the key itself, so it's told me what I've just pressed, and the code of that key, number 65. So I can use this later for validation, but for now the important thing is this key. So it's actually returning back whatever I've been pressing. Well, I can access these individual properties from this E, for this E event. Now if I say, for example, console.log e.key, and what it should show me is A. As soon as I press A, I should be able to see the event, and I should be able to see the letter A, B, C, D, and onwards. Okay, so now that we can actually take keyboard inputs and we're able to access them, we need to create a string within this JavaScript document that is going to be controlling that entire text. So I'm going to create a new variable at the top. Add a comment to say define starting text string. And I'm going to say let text string equal to, well, nothing. It's just going to be a set of quotation marks. So this is going to start off with no text inside it. And then as I press keys, I'm going to add each of those keys onto this text. So let's do that now. Let's just say text string add e.key. So I actually don't need to console log this anymore. Well, I'll console log the event because I'll need that in a second, but this is all I need for now. So this is going to be my text string. It's going to be increased every time I press a key. And at the end of that, I want to output this new text string. So we'll console log text string. Save that. So if I press A now, it's given me the event and it's given me my new string. If I say B, now it's gone A, B, C, D. So it's actually recording what I'm pressing. It's not just deleting it and showing me the new key. It's keeping track of the string. So now let's refresh this again. I can actually type into here. I can say, whoops, onto my document. I can say H-E-L-L-O, and there we go. I've now got this text string fully typed out. So what I need to do now is be able to get it back into the HTML. Right now, it's just sitting within the JavaScript document. I need to be able to pass it back into my query selector, which was this text input here. So to do that, instead of console logging it, I'm just going to say text input. So I access this variable up here, which is linked into the HTML. It's linked to my DOM.text string. No, sorry, not text string. It's going to be text content. So the content of this variable is going to be equal to text string. Save this again, and now what should happen is as I type, it's now, instead of just coming up down here, it's actually coming up within the HTML document. Now this is the problem. It's taking up all the characters that I'm putting in. So when I pressed backspace, rather than deleting the letter, it just typed backspace. Same with control. It's just going to add the word control. So although it's working, it's not working that well. I've got a little bit of an issue here. I need a way of being able to determine whether I'm pressing actual letters and numbers and symbols, or if I'm pressing one of these command buttons, these functions that I want to be handled in a different way. So this is what we need to now add in within this event listener. Now remember, when I'm console logging the event, if I open up the maybe not control, but one of these letters, it's telling me what the key is, and that's what I'm using to add into my string, but it's also giving me a key code. And each of these has a unique key code. So what I can do is use that code and have some validation within here. So let's get rid of this console log. I don't actually need that right now. I can just say key is equal to the event.key code. So it's going to give me that number. Well, I guess I could console log that back out just so you can see what I'm meaning. So now when I press the letters, it's giving me the number of them rather than the whole event. So now I can just nest this inside an if statement. I can say if, and I'll do a bunch of checks here. So first of all, let's break them up over a few lines. So we'll say if key is greater than, and I've already looked up what all these key codes are. So if it's greater than 47 and it's less than 60, well, these are my, in fact, let's just add a comment. Not like that, not like that either. Type in manually. These are the number keys and the colon. So if they're any of those, then they're fine. Or, and then I go into the next line, I'll just copy this down. Or if the keys are between 64 and 91, then these are my letter keys. So what I'm doing here is I'm typing out all of the codes that are acceptable, all of the codes that I want to be able to include in the text. So those are my letter keys. Then we go on to 95 less than 112. These are my numpad keys. So it's still numbers, but on the numpad. Then copy this down again. And I'm going to go for 185 and 193. So these are the special keys. And then lastly, there's also a few more special keys that are not within the same bracket. So 218, 223. I'm just going to put special keys again. Okay, so if it's any of those, let's close, I don't need an or here, so let's close this bracket, get rid of that one. If it's any of those, then, so this has become quite long now and a little bit difficult to format actually. Move that back up here. So in that case, if it's any of those, then they're all acceptable. So I'm going to move this section within here, because if it's any of those keys, then I want to use them and I want to add them into the text. So I keep this bit. So I add whatever that key or that letter is into my text string. And I shouldn't move that. Let's get rid of that. Put that back into the overall function. So not inside the if statement, because this is going to be updated regardless. It just depends on what's being pressed. So now let's just make sure this actually works. Save this and try again. So I'll type hello. So the spacebar doesn't work. But if I press enter, backspace, control, none of those are registering. So at least I know that it is registering just letters and numbers. So we're part of the way there. Now we just need to add in some more functionality, which is my spacebar and the backspace. So I can add a little bit more validation to this. So those letters are all acceptable. Well, what are the other scenarios? Well, let's say else if key is equal to 32. Now 32 is the spacebar. If that happens, then I don't want to add the text spacebar. What I want to do is take my text string and I want to just add a blank space to it. So I take a set of quotation marks and I just put a space in between them. So let's see now if this works. And go hello world. No, it doesn't. So what have I done wrong here? Oh, I've forgotten an equals sign there. So plus equals, let's try again. Hello world. There we go. So now I can put a space and let's see how many I can put. So it's unlimited. I can put in as many spaces as I want because of this CSS property that I've set within the H1 tag here to control white space. Okay, so that's working pretty well, but I can't delete anything. If I press backspace, nothing happens. So let's add in another else if statement. And this is going to be key is equal to 8. So if key is 8, which is backspace, then I want to get rid of the last letter. So I take my text string and I say that it's equal to text string dot slice from 0 and -1. So it just gets rid of whatever's on the end. Save that again and say, oops, I'm typing in the wrong place. Save that, go into this document and say HELLO, and I can just work backwards and delete them. So that's pretty much all working. But what I do notice is that although I start off with some initial text, as soon as I press something, all of it disappears. So the reason for that is because I'm resetting my text string to nothing. What you could do is say that a text string is equal to the text input text content to begin with. And that way, whatever you've typed in at the beginning here is automatically added onto. So let's just say text string is equal to text input dot text content. Save that. Oops, I keep typing in the wrong place. Go in here, and now I can just continue adding onto it. So it's already taken whatever I put into this HTML document, pulled that through, extracted the text from it, and said, well, that's what we're starting with. So we can just add onto it as we go. And there you go. That's how you create this typewriter effect with, in reality, very few lines of JavaScript. So I hope that was useful. And if you like this video, then feel free to subscribe. Thanks for watching.